The following program is brought to you by Naleo TV, the People's Platform.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our General Plan Comprehensive Review public meeting here in South Hilo. My name is Douglas Namle. I am with the County of Hawaii Planning Department, and I have the privilege of moderating today's important conversation. First off, I'd like to introduce some of the leadership and voices that you'll be hearing from throughout our panel today. First, we have Zendo Kern, who is the Planning Director. We have Bethany Morrison, who is the Administrator for the Office of Sustainability, Climate, Equity, and Resilience. We have April Serpernant, who is the Long Range Planning Manager with our department. And we have Natasha Soriano, who is a Senior Transportation Planner with the department as well. So we are here today for the second of 3 public workshops. There will also be a workshop next week on September the 5th. That'll be online. I'll be sharing information about our website later where you can check that out and share information about that upcoming one. And we'll also be organizing a number of community meetings all over our island over the next few months as well. So information about these meetings are here, and more details are available on our website. For those who will be visiting in our community meetings, we have the privilege of partnering with Naleo TV to record today's meeting. We really encourage members of our public to watch this recording and then join us at the community meetings in your area in the coming months. So we thought it'd be helpful to walk through what we will be covering together today. Our panel will be discussing the purpose of the general plan, the process of the development of the general plan, its framework, an orientation around the draft of the general plan, which is the moment we are in right now, and then also next steps in terms of public process and adoption of this draft. Before we get started, I would love to share a couple of ground rules. First, we ask that we all kind of, be in the space with the spirit of aloha, to listen with understanding, to embrace different perspectives, to be respectful of one another and the views that we are here to discuss today, to agree to disagree. And a big piece of our work will also be around we'll take some pauses to answer questions that may be clarifying or informing throughout our presentation. Janice and Kim, who are with me up here, will be in the audience. We ask that you record your comments and questions. Raise your hand, we'll give you a card. And during some of our breaks, we will kind of walk through some of the questions that might help to clarify, inform, or move our conversation forward. Logistics-wise, we also have restrooms on either side of the stage here, men's room right behind where I am, and women's on the other side of the room. And we ask that you silence your phones, or if you get a call, to please step outside and rejoin us when you can. With that, I'd love to invite our Planning Director, Zendo Kern, to kick us off with the general plan purpose. Thank you.
Thank you for being here. It's a privilege and honor to be able to go through this process of the general plan. It's been a journey. I want to talk about the purpose of the general plan. That's the volume that we're looking for. All right, so the county charter calls for the general plan to set forth the county council's long-range policy for comprehensive physical, economic, environmental, and social cultural well-being of the county. So why is the general plan important? We generally need a plan of where we're going, right? Most of us need to have an idea where we're going to go to, how things are going to be. And if we don't have a plan, we don't necessarily know where we're going to go. So the long-range plan is to set forth out till 2045 in this case, and it's to really bring in multiple different elements from where should development occur, where should development not occur, how can the departments work together, what are our economic drivers, how should we work with tourism at a very high level. So, in more practical terms, it provides that long-range vision of creating a healthy, viable, and sustainable communities while also serving as a planning tool used to guide the decisions and helping achieve that vision. So in many cases, it's really all about us coming together at a very high level. And so in this slide, it shows that high level of, I want to call it, say, that 30,000 foot elevation. The general plan is not necessarily specific. It's general, it's broad. It's about bringing that collective of the community of our county together and coming up with a very high level plan. And then that drives and feeds into more specific plans. And as we go down that chain, say like community development plans, so that's going to be more of a development plan for that specific community, or special area plans or urban plans, regulatory measures, county codes, and then all the way coming down to say hitting the ground to a permit. Right, the permit is you actually got your permit and you can actually build something from there. It's very specific. So the general plan is that very high level, broad arching goals, policies and objectives that have basically a continuity across the entire island, serving our entire island. While we live on an island with very diverse and unique areas and regions, this plan needs to cover all of those in a comprehensive level. What the general plan is not, it's not a detailed plan, it's not a conceptual plan. It's, again, that very high level element of that broad process of us coming together. Moving on to the scope of how we come together in a few of the key areas, we have health and safety. That's obviously very vital to our community. Housing, big issue right now. Land use drives into housing. Land use also drives into infrastructure, and infrastructure drives into land use. All of that around our recreational and open spaces while preserving our natural and cultural resources. And so what we're looking at is basically a whole systems approach to sustainability. We live on an island, we need to be sustainable, and it has to work and all jive together in the sense that we want to keep our sense of place, we want to have economic opportunities, we want to have housing, we don't necessarily want it to sprawl. And so how do we keep this beautiful island community that we have in a manner that can actually keep the children of the island home if they want to stay, or maybe bring the children back home? This plan is supposed to really help that. And it's all about creating these healthy, safe, resilient communities, sustainable and responsible development, a thriving, diverse, and regenerative economy, collaborative cultural and environmental stewardship, and efficient, equitable, and integrated government. So it's really about bringing all of those pieces together under one comprehensive framework. So going over the general plan process, we are on our fourth general plan. We've had 3 so far in the county's history. First one in 1971, second one in 1989, the third one in 2005, and that is our current general plan. And this general plan, it started its initial comprehensive review in 2015. And here we are, we've gone through this really awesome, robust process. During this time, we've had lava flows, we've had COVID, we've had all kinds of things occur that have actually, while it's challenged us as an island community, as government, I think it's also challenged us to look at the plan and then make it that much more robust and more dynamic. So I'm just going to go over kind of what we have been doing. We started the review in 2015, did a lot of community outreach, gathered a lot of community feedback from all around the island, put together a draft in 2019, took that out for more review, gathered more feedback, brought that together, worked on another draft in 2023, brought that out for more review, and got more feedback, perfecting the plan, bringing it together, balancing all of the different elements of our community and needs. Through that process, we have the project timeline and the outreach timeline, as you can see on the screen. I'm not going to go over all these details, as you could see. I want to move on to the next slide, what really kind of highlights the amount of public input, the amount of community outreach that has come into this plan. So as you can see, we've had thousands and thousands and thousands of comments. And we've collected those comments, we've collected that feedback, and molded them into this general plan. And I think it's really important to kind of step back and think about a general plan, a comprehensive plan with input from a diverse community and what that looks like. And I think we can all think about a time that we've had to plan something with a large group, call it a family, call it a social event, and maybe going to Disneyland. And you really want to have everything. But when you're within a group, not everybody gets everything they want. So you have to come up with a plan that everybody's generally good with. and that will still achieve that goal and result that we'd like to have. And I think when I think about that, I think of, say, like a family trip we'd go on. I want to do this, I want to do that. I got to do this, maybe not that, because somebody else wanted to do those other elements. So that's really like trying to bring all that together and balance that out from an island-wide perspective, which makes it very, very challenging to really honor and balance all of these perspectives to come up with a plan that'll hit the targets, hit the goals, hit the objectives that we're looking for from a community-wide basis. And I think we have a really good plan here that does that. And then as we move this plan into adoption, we can then drill down onto more focused plans that will serve our individual communities and those individual needs at a more defined element. Those community development plans moving into functional plans, moving into code, et cetera. So overall, I think we've done a very good job of honoring and balancing all that has gone into that process, and the team that we have here has really done that. So what's going to happen next? We're going to move the general plan release was released. The final Director General Plan recommended draft, I think I said that right, was released on July 29th. And we're doing our public workshops through September 5th. The public comments are due on September 26th. And then we'll be making our way to planning commissions during October and making its way to the county council in the beginning of 2025, looking forward sometime adoption in 2025. With that, I'm going to turn it over to April, and she'll move over the next stage of the general plan. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you, Zendo. So I'm going to just speak briefly about the framework of the plan, and then we'll get into the actual elements or sections of the plan from a topic standpoint. So the vision that we have for the general plan really came from the community values that were adopted through the community development plans, as well as other community master plans and area plans. And it really tries to synthesize in a form to form a singular island-wide vision statement, which represents the ability to plan for the future in alignment with those community values. This is the first comprehensive review of the general plan that takes into consideration the values, principles, and practices of sustainability consistent with our traditional systems of ecological stewardship. And so it focuses on balancing, as Zendo talked about as well, balancing and creating a livable built environment for our island residents, looking for harmony with nature, a resilient economy, interwoven equity, healthy communities, and responsible regional planning. The components of the plan that you'll find as you review the plan itself, we just talked about the overarching vision for the plan, and then there are goals and objectives which are at a higher level that really start to take details from that vision. And then from there, it goes deeper and further into policies and actions that we can then start to implement that can be guidance for departments and other agencies on how we can move forward with a resilient community. Those sections of the plan that we will start going through next, the general chapters are the introduction, which we've basically covered as of now in this first section. Collaborative biocultural stewardship, which is our natural and cultural resources section. Adaptation to climate change. Sustainable development, which really points to our built environment. So that's land use, transportation, other types of built elements that are in our built environment. And then a thriving regenerative economy, and then implementation. How do we take this plan and these policies and actions and move them forward? So I will turn it over to Bethany.
Good afternoon, everyone. Bethany Morrison, Interim Administrator for the County Office of Sustainability, Climate Equity, and Resilience. But I'm here today as a recovering long-range planner who supported this project in the past. Thank you. I want to talk about the first chapter in the draft, which is really our biocultural stewardship chapter, and thinking about how we design a planning system and how we plan around things, recognizing that natural and cultural resources are really the base for how we then design our infrastructure needs, our community and land use decisions. So that chapter then is the first chapter that you'll see in the draft. And just honoring, of course, our ecosystem benefits that really these services provide for us, our clean air and water, food and medicine, healthy soils, and flood control. So thinking about how the traditional ecological knowledge of this place really does begin with understanding those resources before we then continue the planning process. So this really honors that. And collaborative biocultural stewardship is kind of a mouthful to say, but it really does capture the fact that these resources are connected. And it takes multiple stewardship stakeholders really working together to manage those effectively. As we know, our resources don't necessarily follow jurisdictional boundaries. So in many cases, we have to partner with other entities to really manage them effectively. The goal for this chapter is that natural and cultural resources are thriving and sustainably managed, preserved and restored to maintain our unique and diverse environment. So really thinking about making sure that those resources are here in perpetuity for future generations. There's several objectives in this plan, thinking about our natural native habitats and how we want to increase the resilience of those habitats, thinking about the function of our watersheds, looking at how we think about our scenic character and our historic resources. But the one I want to highlight today is really about how we increase community restoration efforts and stewardship of these resources. Again, recognizing that the county can't do this alone, it really is a collaborative effort. And then finally, for this chapter, I wanted to highlight, similar to what we have now in the 2005 general plan, this draft includes a listing of natural beauty sites. These sites are places that are really endowed with the natural beauty that we know and love on this island, and thinking about making sure that those areas are protected through various aspects and land use decisions. So this is just a snapshot of the map that you'll see in the draft. And I think it's in the Puna district. And then, of course, also another snapshot of a much longer table of those natural beauty sites by district. This information was gathered from the current 2005 general plan, but it was reviewed through a scenic resources and mapping study that was done. And then it was also updated past the 2018 eruption to include the new Fisher 8 site in Leilani Estates. Okay, I'm going to move on to the climate change chapter for the plan. This chapter is really unique in that it speaks to multiple other places in our draft. Thinking about our climate and thinking about those things that have an impact or are impacted, frankly. So we think about what we know of transportation being our highest source of greenhouse gas emissions for our island, and thinking about ways that we can really focus that transportation to reduce vehicle miles traveled and utilize more mass transit opportunities. We also, of course, look to our energy and electricity sector to be more efficient. That's a better use of our county dollars, frankly, but also just recognizing, that we have the highest electricity costs. And so how can we reduce some of that burden? Looking at waste and wastewater, our water resources, how those are managed, and land use. So this chapter, although it does have certainly its own goal and objectives that I'll get into, it really, again, speaks to the other sections of the plan that really help us to address this issue. And then finally, I just wanted to mention that we have an integrated climate action plan that was adopted in 2023. that really is the specific and strategic roadmap for county actions related to how we mitigate and adapt to some of these issues. The climate change goal here: ensure a just transition to a climate resilient island by addressing the causes and impacts of climate change through incorporating equitable climate mitigation and adaptation priorities into policies, programs, infrastructure, and decision making. There's 3 main objectives in this chapter. Again, we're going to recognize the other ones that are related in a second, but specifically to this chapter, making sure that our decisions are equitable and uplift historically marginalized communities. Making sure that our own county footprint is reduced. And finally, making sure that we're continuing to improve on identification of any threats and adaptation options. And as I mentioned, again, this chapter really speaks to those other sections of the plan that we're going to go out talk about today as well. But these related objectives include reducing vehicle miles traveled, increasing the protection of our drinking water, planning for our sewer system, increasing green infrastructure practices. So that's really how we manage our stormwater. Thinking about, of course, striving towards energy self-sufficiency, achieving zero waste, and finally increasing that collaboration and cooperation that's needed.
I will now kick off our sustainable development section, and after the land use section, we'll take a few questions. So we'll start with land use. And looking at our land use, this section really represents the broader policy direction and look to the CDPs and other master plans for further guidance throughout this process. They're used to guide land use decisions, to consider, to be consistent with the vision and values of the community in relationship to those community development plans. But they're also intended to be broad and flexible. So the general plan and the land use maps, I just want to point out, do not change any existing entitlements or existing zoning that's currently in place on the land. So it is a future guide of what we hope to happen in the future. So for the goals and objectives, the goal is really to strategically apply progressive land use strategies incorporating indigenous and contemporary knowledge and place-based practices to direct and manage growth for the health and safety of our community. And when looking at the objectives, to maintain that community character and land use compatibility, to increase the integration of natural planning systems or natural systems planning, to increase equitable planning and decision-making processes, and reduce the threat to life and property from natural hazards and disasters. So you'll see as you work through the plan and some of the policies, there's a section on natural hazards. And so we have policies to try to help us adapt and mitigate to some of those events that we see. As for the land use designations, we did not make a lot of changes. We tweaked a few things based on things that we've heard over the years and some throughout this process. We will touch on each one of these in a few minutes as we go through each section, but we made a slight change with industrial, just separating it into light and heavy type uses, a name change for important ag lands to productive. We added a natural to incorporate more passive type uses, and then open was renamed to recreational, and I'll explain why in just a moment. We'll start with looking at some of the urban and rural uses. And this is just a snapshot. It's not intended to be read, but you'll see this in the plan itself in the land use section. So it's just there as a visual cue. But we look to the community development plans and master plans we look to make better transitions between different types of uses and different types of densities so that there's a more logical flow from one use to another. We, of course, have included public comments throughout the entire process, including through other processes that Bethany spoke to, such as our climate action plan, through the community development plans and action committees, and so on. We also look to existing regulations, starting with the 2005 general plan and our state land use, which is unique to our state, and our existing zoning. And then access to infrastructure, particularly in our urban areas, is an important piece to this, and you'll hear more about that when Natasha talks about some of the infrastructure elements. But we look to see where infrastructure is currently available and where it should be prioritized in the future. And then the last piece is, at least on this slide, is looking at the rural transition. The 2005 general plan did not utilize the rural designation as much as we are recommending that it be. And we've heard a lot from community about really wanting to have a better transition between urban uses and agricultural uses. And the rural designation is really the best way to do that. And so what that looks like, this chart is from our land use report that is on our website and available for everyone to view. So you'll see the 2005, I think I can move, no, I won't be able to do that one. You'll see the 2005, the first column is the existing land use that is in what we call the LUPAG map. And then 2024 proposed is on the right-hand column. And so you'll see the brown at the bottom is rural, the rural designation. And so we've increased that quite a bit, again, to try to make a better transition between urban uses and agricultural uses. Resort and industrial stayed mostly the same, with industrial being split to some extent between the high and light industrial uses. But then urban, we tried to be more specific to what types of urban uses are appropriate. If sites were already completely built out, we tried to look at what the existing density is on those sites. And then really better utilize the urban expansion that was used a lot more in the 2005, and really look to more specifically where could that be useful, and otherwise designate the lands as high, medium, or low density to be more specific. In the Hilo area, this is what it looks like currently in the 2005 general plan and then the 2024 general plan, or proposed general plan. And highlighting the differences or the changes would be clearer distinctions in the industrial areas, such as around the airport, of where the heavy industrial in the darker gray and lighter, more service type oriented uses to be in the lighter gray. Reverting the coastal urban expansion down below in the orange, from urban to extensive ag, reverting that back to extensive ag, and then shifting some of the LDU in different places and rural to better fit what has currently been developed in those areas. So you'll see on the left side some changes in the browns and the yellows to depict more of what's on the ground and what might be appropriate in the future. This is just a tighter screenshot of the urban and downtown Hilo area showing the proposed land uses. We also utilized a little bit more of the conservation, and we'll see a little bit later when we look at conservation how we've added more lands to conservation. For agriculture, again, the name change from important ag lands to productive agriculture was done because the state land use has a designation called important ag lands, for those of you who don't know. For those of you who do know, it has been an ongoing confusion for members of the public and landowners, and even other people within our agencies. It gets very confusing when something is called the same thing in two different areas. And so we decided, since important ag land was really intended to be the more productive agricultural lands with viable soils and in current agriculture activity, that productive ag could be a better name in this case. So we've listened to those voices and made that shift. Also, the 2005 general plan has an orchard designation, which grows fruit for the most part, which is productive. So we shifted that over to include in productive agriculture, really just as a simplification. And then we added natural to better define and distinguish more passive type uses. So it's uses that are intended to be left in more of a natural state, largely open space and agricultural uses. It could include natural hazard areas, steep slopes, lava fields that are unproductive for ag, and other public lands that are not in state land use conservation. So this also includes some Malca lands that are not in state land use conservation above 2,500 feet elevation to help preserve some of our Malca forests. But again, some of those lands are also in productive ag, some pastures and things like that. So we recognize that and allow for some agricultural uses within this natural designation. And then we have recreation and conservation. So recreation was really created or kind of shifted from the previous open to include more active recreational spaces, such as our county and state parks, our golf courses, our shoreline setbacks in the urban areas, and other areas like that are not in conservation. And then conservation itself is really for our Malca forests and water reserves, for our land that are actively in conservation and state land use conservation. And then the 2005 also had a pond designation, and we shifted that over to conservation since it falls under that category anyway. And what that looks like in terms of 2005 to 2024 changes is we have had some increase in the bottom sort of teal color is conservation, and we have increased that to some extent. Open and recreation have stayed about the same, although some of the open lands shifted from one use to another, and we added and tried to be clear about where our public parks are located and other recreational spaces. And then in the agriculture district, we have some of that natural lands, again, largely lava fields in some cases, Malca forests and others, extensive agriculture, and then productive ag, which we utilize the study from the University of Hawaii Hilo, both from 2015 and the update that was done in 2020 to also help inform some of these agricultural uses.
Great, thank you, April. And thank you, Bethany and Zendo, for leading us through that part of the presentation today. We would like to take a moment to kind of speak to some of the questions we've started to get from our audience. We've gotten a number, and as I mentioned before, if you do have a question, we have members of our team kind of in the audience with these sheets. It's how we are capturing the questions so we can bring them to the stage here today. So we have a little time to cover a couple before we move on to our next section. And so the first question we have is, what is the difference between the public workshops happening today and the community meetings to come? Will more specific district content be covered?
Hi, yes, this is April. So these workshops, all of these workshops, yesterday in Kona, today in Hilo, and then we have the webinar that's coming up next week, are all basically the same. And so they're covering a broad overview of the general plan and touching on each of the sections and discussing those sections so you have a better sense of what to expect when you explore the draft plan. And then the community meetings are planned to focus a little bit more on those specific communities. So we'll look at some specific policies and guidance that the general plan speaks to in reference to those regions. And we'll make connections between the community development plans or other master plans from those areas and how those were incorporated in this general plan, which can also be seen. We have available on our website the rationale document, policy rationale, and that information is also available in that policy rationale document.
Great. Thank you, April. The next question is a composite of a couple of we've gotten. It's related to climate change, inclusive of climate change, specifically in reference to the Agenda 21 United Nations Sustainable Development Plan, given other priorities and issues that our folks here on our island face. A related question also is in terms of discussion of smart growth, both as a development pattern and principles of it. Is this also related to smart cities and these global sustainable development plans?
This is Bethany Morrison. I can take the first one for climate change. You know, when we look at this plan, really thinking about what is the future for our island and understanding the things that are already impacting us. So we have, a lot of invasive species that are really impacting us. We have storm surge happening along our coastlines that is sort of chewing up our infrastructure. So when we think about climate change and the things that are already impacting us, this plan is really the opportunity to be forward-looking and look at, ways that we can reduce those impacts and ways that we need to adapt, maybe by, shoring up that infrastructure. So it's really about what's needed on our island. This does not speak to necessarily global decisions or anything else that's being made. It's really about what's happening here on our island and how we move forward.
I'll jump in on the smart growth principles. So similar, our thoughts around and our planning principles around smart growth are really around our island and what's good for our island. One of the big challenges we have here is housing. And what drives that is infrastructure, and we're lacking infrastructure. And when we see the need for more housing, do we have the infrastructure? If we don't have the infrastructure, it's not going to happen. And so what we looked at doing is basically creating these urban growth boundary areas in each of our urban areas. So Hilo proper, Waimea proper, Kona, et cetera. And we defined a geographical boundary around that and said, this is our urban growth boundary area. This is the area where we want that higher density. This is the area where we should focus our infrastructure, wastewater, water, et cetera. And what we need is focused investment to actually achieve those results. And each geographical area on the island has its own, unique needs, but commonalities within that too. And essentially what we're doing is if you rewind back to kind of that plantation time on the island, you had communities that you could work there, you could recreate there, you could have community, you could hang out, you could go to school, and it was all within a general reasonable area. You didn't actually have to have a car in certain cases. And in between then and now, we've moved out to more of a sprawl type of concept. And now what we're moving back to is more of these tighter communities, live, work, play, smaller lot sizes, especially as the cost of everything increase. We need to look at, right sizing things so it can actually be achievable for the economics of our island. And that's really what's trying to drive all of our land use patterns is how can we actually achieve the goals that we need. And one of those big parts of that goal is are our children able to stay here on the island? Are they able to have a home? Are they able to have a job? Are they able to swim in a nice, clean ocean, enjoy, the forest as we did growing up? Or can the children come home? And if we're solving for those elements with land use in our environment and our smart growth principles, all the other elements are somewhat taken care of. And so that's really our concept around trying to drive growth where we want it and keep the country in other areas. Thank you.
Both. So we have one question, and we might have time for one or two before we transition to the next one. And there'll be some upcoming moments to pause as well. I noticed that our property is being zoned to natural and recreation from low density urban. What does this do to the value of property? Are we going to be compensated? How are decisions being made? How are property owners included? Is the question.
So the future land use maps or the LUPEG map that you're seeing there doesn't actually effectuate zoning. Your zoning stays the same. You have all the same entitlements that you had prior to that. It's really around future growth. And where does that future growth occur? And during the community development plan process that we went through since, 2007, 8, all the way through the last, say, 4 years, those communities worked on the areas that they wanted to see kind of adjusted. And then that work was uplifted into this general plan. So it's not necessarily just an idea that we're coming up with. This was community driven. But to that point, it doesn't change your zoning. You have every entitlement, every right that you currently have. It's just about potentially, will that property be used or potentially for rezoning in the future? And with that goes a bunch of other things like concurrency that'll probably just make people's head spins if I get into. So you have all the same bundle of rights that you currently have.
Great, thank you, Zendo. And we'll take one more question before we move forward, but there will be time as we move along for additional questions. Thank you, everyone, for your contributions. How can a community member, a lay person, compare the old plan with the changes in this draft? Specifically, how do you compare the map changes and the rationale for the shifts?
Can you repeat that one more time, just so I can make sure I heard all the pieces? Thank you.
Yes. How can a community member or lay person compare the old plan with the changes in this draft? Specifically, I'd like to compare the map changes and the rationale for the shifts.
Great. So the changes can most easily be seen in the policy rationale document. That's one piece of looking at where the policies in the proposed general plan have come from. Some of those are from the 2005 general plan, others are from community development plans, and others are from agency functional plans and things like that. So that's one piece of it. For the maps, there's what's currently available on the interactive map is you can turn on, and we have a video that tells you how to do it, but it's pretty simple. With a few clicks will get you there, is looking at the current general plan map and the proposed general plan map with a swipe bar. And so you can see the before and after, and you can zoom in as far as you want to zoom in and see where that before and after is, and that's the easiest way to see it. We are also working on an electronic map to be available where everything that did not change will be one color, such as white, and any parcels or polygons or areas that did change will be a color. And so we're working on getting that out very soon, I hope within a week or so, and we'll send out an e-blast, get it out on emails, and others, put it on our website when that is available.
Great, thank you, April. So now I'd like to hand it off to Natasha to lead us through the next section of the presentation.
Thank you. So next I'll be getting into transportation. And if you remember, we just came from land use. And this is a little bit of a cycle of what happens when we have a change in land use. Usually we can then expect increased traffic. That may or may lead to deterioration of level of service, which would then need arterial improvements, then leads to increased accessibility. And this is kind of a cycle. But with that increased accessibility, then we go back and examine, and maybe we need another land use change, or your property values may increase. So in our transportation chapter, we really try to focus on how can we mitigate that deterioration of level of service, and especially in tying in with our themes of sustainability. We are looking at what we heard from the CDPs, needing multimodal connectivity, integration of our transportation systems with land use, and asset management, And then in terms of sustainability, we're looking at energy efficiency, equitable access, and connectivity. As Bethany mentioned before, the transportation sector is the largest consumer of energy, and as well as the largest producer of greenhouse gas emissions. So with that, our transportation goal really is to have every community connected by a multimodal and modernized transportation system that provides a system that is safe, efficient, comfortable for everyone, people and goods. Our first objective in this chapter is exactly like that picture I had, to achieve a transportation system that is consistent and will accommodate planned growth. So from our land use maps, we have these proposed roads that is a combination of what we heard again from the CDPs and proposed roads from that planning effort. Some of it comes from the state surface transportation plan. And then a lot of these also come from the 2005 plan that still need to be constructed. But again, if you're looking at that cycle, one way that we can help reduce the deterioration of level of service or help mitigate increased traffic is really to start focusing on transportation solutions with a priority on pedestrian, bicycling, and transit modes of transportation. So that kind of leads into this next set of objectives with increased transportation activity and connectivity through public access planning and active living corridors in our urban areas. And also then reducing vehicle miles traveled by coupling that connectivity with increasing ridership of mass transit by 50% by 2045. Our next set of objectives really look at the roadway design itself, really focusing on the complete streets mode of design, that every mode of transportation has its place on a roadway. So as I hope you can see from the picture, we have sidewalks, large sidewalks. We have protected bike lanes. There's still some street parking, and then street trees that make it very comfortable to do the more active transportation types. We're also looking at incorporating green infrastructure to reduce storm water runoff. And the second picture below kind of shows a picture of how roadways really bring infrastructure. And we can really start managing how much stormwater runoff that we increase by producing more roadways and impervious surfaces. Lastly, all of these concepts together really help to increase safety for the most vulnerable users, which are those people who are not in cars, but especially for makes walkable cities and really helps protect our Keiki and Kupuna. Lastly, in this transportation section, we're looking at how do we have a well-maintained system. There's a concept that good roads cost less in the long run. And with most of the state's bridges on our highways system here, we also really need to take care and make sure that we're maintaining those bridges. If you live in Hamakua, then you know how difficult it is when one of those bridges needs repair, major repair. Even if you're going to Pahala, we have in the past 2 bridges out there that needed major repair. And lastly, even though we don't have a harbor or airport under county jurisdiction, it is still important that we make access easy to those places and encourage the state to provide investments that help these important economic drivers. And now I'm going to get into public utilities, which a lot of the primary themes from transportation kind of carry over here. Again, we're looking at sustainability, and this time more in like water resources, environmental protection from human activity around these utilities. Asset management is a really important goal for us as a county, and equitable access. One of the biggest themes in our utility section is this idea of one water. It's something that you may have heard. Honolulu has taken steps to moving toward this concept where we're not looking at drinking water separately from wastewater or separately from stormwater. We're looking at water as one resource. And by doing that, we can start filling these gaps between ways to either reuse, recycle, or mitigate depletion of our water resources, groundwater resources, but also even with stormwater. How do we collect that and avoid, any chemicals that may be running off with the water, any dirt or erosion? So in the bigger picture, there's several ways you could do it. We have a building, and the building then might have a more of a closed water system, whereas water comes in and they consume it. They have on-site wastewater treatment, and then are able to reuse the water either for irrigation or non-potable uses. But we're trying to look at how can we do this a little bit more systematically for a community where it may be a little bit more harder for a single family home to do this by themselves, right? So again, it's how our systems work together. How does our roadway collecting stormwater be able to collect stormwater for other uses rather than just sending it back into the ocean? How do we reclaim wastewater so that we're not using drinking water for irrigation or for agricultural uses? Lastly, our utilities look at energy efficiency and encouraging our private partners to focus on renewable energy, and then also encouraging and collaborating with broadband expansion, especially in our rural areas, so that there may be access for all. Lastly, for this section, we're looking at public facilities, and these are the places that really make your neighborhood, your community, right? So your parks, your police, your fire stations, your schools, and things like hospitals, everything we need so that we are a functioning community. So the goal here is that communities are safe, protected, and have access to integrated health, education, and social services to support a high quality of life for all residents. Here, I'd like to really highlight one of the goals and objectives of this is active zero waste in Hawaii County by 2045. And in a parks section of this, we're looking at providing park facilities located within a 10-minute walk in urban areas and a 10-minute drive in rural communities. In other ways, we're also helping, or other objectives and policies really look to supporting healthcare in our rural areas and education opportunities across the island.
Thank you, Natasha. I can take this moment as we take a pause to address some questions we have in the queue, but would also welcome folks who may have questions around transportation, public services that were just addressed. Please, tag one of our staff to provide the question. So this is a question around the process. So given the timing of right now in this meeting of the general plan drafting, how will comments be addressed at this stage? And I think kind of a composite question is, how will I be able to know whether or not my comments have been addressed or considered in the plan?
Yeah, great question. Thank you. So at this stage, this final recommended plan will move forward to the Planning Commission, and all of the comments that we receive starting July 29th through September 26th will be collected and added to the package that will be submitted to the planning commissions. And then the planning commissions will take all of those comments into consideration on their review. They will be having public hearings. They have about 5 months from when they receive the package to make their recommendations to the county council. And after that, it will move forward to the county council for further review, including any comments received now and comments received later. Will go towards the county council, and they will then deliberate and review all of those comments as well.
Okay, great. Thank you, April. And this next question, I think, is integrative between the first topics and our most recent topics. How can the county identify and acquire more coastal parkland and make managed retreat effective to protect roads, parks, and infrastructure?
Sorry, Douglas, can you repeat that?
Happy to. How can the county identify and acquire more coastal parkland and make managed retreat effective to protect our parks, roads, and infrastructure?
Okay, I think we have a pretty active PONC, which is our Public Open Space Natural Resource Commission. I stumble on that every time. So they actually help the county to acquire private properties and preserve them for conservation. So that's a really effective way that we've been able to acquire a lot of coastal properties that have, unique resources that we want to make sure that they're preserved in perpetuity. So that's one way. And then I think the other component regarding managed retreat, I think we need to think about our infrastructure. And so places like Ali'i Drive, Bayfront Highway here in Hilo, we already know that those infrastructures are being impacted. And so it's about how do we rehabilitate those infrastructures to accommodate some of the coastal surges that are happening. And there's different ways, and certainly we have a transportation planner here that can speak to how we can design those roadways to actually be protected from oncoming surge, but also continue to function and be a multimodal passageway.
Great. Thank you, Bethany. So with that, I'd like to hand it back to Natasha to walk us through our next section.
So you heard me talk about transportation, public facilities, public utilities, and you've heard our land use piece. What that all then culminates to is how we can then support housing for all. So our goal for housing is to have access to adequate and affordable housing that meets population and provides equitable opportunities for household and flexibility and mobility. There's 3 objectives here in this section: diversifying and expanding housing, managing existing housing, and creating affordable housing. And one way we can create affordable housing really is focus it on the diversifying of expanding housing. So this is kind of a typical house in Hilo. This one's for sale. How many of us live in a single family home? A few of us here. It's really becoming almost unattainable for young families. So what can we do to increase our housing stock? Well, we know we don't want this, right? It's not something that we desire. So what does that mean? We really start need to looking at providing the missing middle housing. So really to even before we get to like mid-rise housing, we're looking at duplexes, triplexes, cottage courthouse styles. Again, going back to what Zendo said about, right-sizing lots or providing for multiple houses on a single lot, really to give people choices, right? So I myself am a family of 6 in my household. I do need a bigger house. I do need a little space, but maybe my colleague here is soon becoming an empty nester and doesn't need that much space and would prefer to live in a cottage courthouse with a little cozy neighborhood. So really, we really need to start increasing our inventory, but not just increasing it by building more single family homes, really giving options so that people can right size their living space for their lifestyle. Lastly, I'll be talking about integrated systems. And what that really is in order to provide the housing, we really need to start looking how we can integrate all of our departments' works together to provide our projects more on time, more fiscally responsible. So one of the two biggest things that I'll touch upon here today is collaboration. If you go back to the transportation slide where we have that roadway, you saw that roadway brought all of your infrastructure in, right? We looked at sewers, underground water, maybe underground utilities, but really roadways is the heart of infrastructure that can really then bring that to a community. So that really requires our departments, DPW, DEM, DWS, and our utilities to work together. An example I have is when we were working here on Kealve Street, downtown Hilo, we have a lot of aging utilities. DWS needed to go and upgrade their water line. DEM definitely needed to upgrade their water system. So rehabbing that corridor was a real opportunity for us to do a one dig, right? And not have to dig up that brand new asphalt to go then put in the water main when it breaks, or to wait for our sewer system to break and cause a catastrophe. So really looking at these opportunities of how we can work together and not looking at all of our projects as a county as individual. One roadway project, one pipe replacement. So that's what we're really seeking in collaboration in this section. And again, fiscal integrity is really also looking at how our departments planning out their projects. We have CIP that's looking at a 6-year forecast, but how are we looking at mid-range? How are we looking at even looking at our GP, how are we looking to provide projects from our CDPs in a timely manner?
So now we'll cover the economic section of the plan. The goal really is to have an economy that is diverse and regenerative and innovative, while also improving the financial well-being of our residents with a focus on increasing local economic opportunities. And so there's a lot that falls under that, of course, but improving access at all levels for education and training, increased growth and health for small businesses is an important piece for our residents, and incorporating resiliency and diversity into county programs and plans so that we can better support healthy communities and economic development and revitalization for our island and our residents. In looking at agriculture, which is one of our larger economic markets, we're looking for it to be a robust and diverse sector to address food security and include broad ranges of agricultural-based businesses. And so part of that is making sure that there's access to productive agricultural lands where people can do that, but also infrastructure is an important piece, making sure that there's water that's appropriate for agricultural production, commercial kitchens in various places for agricultural farmers to bring their products and things like that. So making sure that they have the proper infrastructure to support and have our island be more food sustainable and food resilient. We know that our visitor industry is probably our largest economic sector for the state, and it is an important one for a lot of people who live here and make a living based on the visitor industry. And it's important that they have a high quality of visitation while they're here, but we also need a high quality of life for our residents, and make sure that is maintained in the visitor sector. So supporting the visitor industry to an investment in its connection with communities, the land, and also our historic and multicultural heritage is very critical, and helping for our visitors to also experience an authentic Hawaii Island a stay while they're here.
Okay, what's the point of planning unless we're going to implement? So I want to talk about the implementation section and think about those components that we've included in this draft. Several key components to this regarding transparency. So that means that we're engaging folks on a regular basis, that it's a long-term and holistic approach, and that there's consistency across the general plan, our various codes, and agency plans as well. And then speaking to the collaboration that's needed across agencies and partners to really implement. And then I want to just take a shot at looking at the implementation system itself. So implementation happens up and down this graphic that Zendo described earlier, with the general plan really laying out our long-term vision, but really then actions happening down at those more detailed levels through our community development plans, through our agency's functional plans, such as our water or wastewater plans, and then all the way down through about how we're prioritizing investment in our infrastructure. And we also thought about thinking of the monitoring and evaluation, again, thinking about making sure that there's transparency. So one of the questions that has come up in the past is about how are we prioritizing implementation of the plan. So if you look at the draft, you'll see that there are 4 implementation phases, and really starting to look at how we prioritize that implementation long term. So we know that that first phase is really about, again, the consistency. So making sure that following, once this general plan is adopted, we need to make sure that all of our codes are consistent with the plan, so that it really can be implemented. So looking at those code adoptions, looking at any organizational changes that need to happen within the county to implement, and of course, looking at our capital improvement program and how that can be adapted to make sure that it's prioritizing the things in this plan. And then the following phases really get into, once you do those consistency things, then we just want to keep monitoring and checking that things are moving along and progressing. That gets us to the performance measures, or the indicators that really tell us how well we're doing. There's a table in the back of the draft that really speaks to examples of things that we can look at along the way to check in and see how well we're doing. So the examples I have here are from the Collaborative Biocultural Stewardship chapter, and really think about, again, checking in on how well we're doing. So are we having an increase or a decrease in our native habitat coverage? Are our water bodies, water quality improving, or is it declining? And how are the community groups involved in stewardship? Are we having more stewardship, or are we having a decline in that as well? So these are just ways that we can monitor and make sure that we're progressing towards the goals in the plan and make adjustments as needed. And then finally, speaking to transparency, thinking about how we can share this information out to the public. One way is through the mayor's annual report that goes to the county council, where it really takes a look at what the departments have accomplished that year, and we can include implementation of this plan in that annual report. Also to do a 5-year implementation status report, which is really just looking at all the priorities and actions and seeing, have we completed these things or not? And then finally, as it gets to the going into the next comprehensive review cycle, that's again another opportunity to check in and see how well we have completed this implementation of this plan.
Great. Thank you, Bethany. So we're at a point where we can take a moment to close out some of the more formal presentation. We still have a couple more questions that folks haven't had a chance to ask yet. So I think we have some time to cover that after we move through this next section. So as Zendo and I walked through earlier, this is just one step in a process that's been going on for several years now and will continue to progress over the rest of this year and onward. There are multiple engagement opportunities that have happened and are upcoming, from our public workshops to an online workshop next week. Community meetings, our Conveo website where the document is hosted and where folks have been able to submit comments, and also our planning website with more information, including a number of the reference documents that the team today spoke to, the rationale document, the land use study, et cetera. Would love to highlight just some of the upcoming dates as well that you see on the right side of your screen, in terms of some of the community meetings across the districts, where there will be a deeper zoom in on those areas and their relationship to the community development plans for each of those areas. Following this engagement is this ongoing public process that folks spoke to earlier. Comments have been received since the end of July through, to get us ready for today in this series of workshops. Public comments are due on September 26th. They will be prepared and submitted to the planning commissions with this director's recommended draft of the general plan. And from there, I believe it was 5 months, right, that the commissions have to do their work before it moves on to the county council thereafter. If you want more information, here are some QR codes, images of our website. Our website is planning.hawaiicounty.gov, where all these documents and more are available for everyone. It's a great resource to go to. So, mahalo for everyone's contributions and their attention during the more formal presentation. As I mentioned earlier, we can take a couple of more questions that we got from the audience before we wrap up for the afternoon. If folks have a question, there are these cards that staff are supporting to write them down. So if you could please raise your hand and our team will get you a card. So one question we have is relates to one of the earlier topics around biocultural stewardship. Why are invasive species part of the climate change discussion?
Thank you for that question. So as our temperatures get warmer, and we've experienced some pretty warm temperatures this summer, that really changes the habitat and the suitability for various species. And so what we see happening is our invasive species tend to be more resilient than our native species. And as temperatures increase and our native species begin to struggle a little bit, the invasive species then come in and take over. So that's one way, even looking at, our mosquito population and thinking about our birds. Again, as that habitat changes and the temperatures get warmer, higher up Mauka, you have the mosquitoes that also move up there and then harm our native bird population. So it's basically the temperature. It's related to the temperature. And then the second way I would say isn't as tied to climate change, but is still part of this conversation, is really if we have wildfire events, what we see is that our native habitats can't recover as quickly. And what, again, moves into that space is our invasive species. So those are the sort of the two components that are addressed in this plan.
Great. Thank you, Bethany. And another topic, but related to our ecosystems, how is current storm surge different now than it has been in the past?
Getting back to the warming of our climate, so our water actually expands with that warming climate, and so you have sea level rise that happens. Then when you have a storm on top of that sea level rise, you just have further inundation of those waves and that wave energy into our infrastructure and our communities.
Great. So to shift gears a bit, we've gotten a couple questions that I'm going to bring together because they're very interrelated. And this is specifically related to the role of the community development plans for Hilo in particular. So why is there not a community development plan for Hilo when Hilo's one of the most populated cities on our island? And related, in the absence of a community development plan or an action committee for Hilo, how can the community be engaged on a regular basis? And what kind of meetings are happening to support this district?
Yeah, great. Thank you for that question. So Hilo does have a older community development plan, but it does need updating. We do need an updated version, and it's possible depending on how the general plan is adopted. And we were so close into this process that we didn't feel it. We needed to start another whole process of doing a CDP for Hilo, but it may end up being an urban development plan, which might be a little different than a regional development plan like some of the other regions have. So I think that's yet to be determined. But we have engaged a lot of different groups and neighborhoods. We've talked with all of the DHHL neighborhoods, for example, Downtown Hilo Association, Chamber of Commerce, and a lot of other organizations in Hilo to strive to hear from as many people as we can. I would encourage people in the Hilo area to continue to work with their associations, be it a neighborhood association or staying in touch with their county council members for things that are going on in their communities and things of that nature, looking for things that are coming in front of county council that may interest them, for example. So we've really looked to reach out as much as we can in Hilo, and once we start getting more into this process, we'll look to see what's the most appropriate piece for Hilo. I'll also say that Hilo has a number of area master plans that a lot of other urban areas do not have. So Hilo has the downtown multimodal plan, which really speaks to a lot of different kinds of urban design issues and topics and needs in the downtown urban area. We have the Hilo zone map, which speaks to future roadways and where roads should be widened in different places and things like that. So we have a little more detail from a long-range planning perspective in Hilo than we do in the other urban environments.
Thank you, April. Sure. Please, council member.
Those things are getting done as dictates or as the plan is put out there. So make sure that people are engaged on a regular way. That committee, if you're going to do an urban plan, update the plan, you'll be getting an action to go along with that.
If that is the future of any kind of plan that we might do for the urban area of Hilo, we'll have some sort of community working group. We do that with all of our area plans. So that's a given that we would definitely have that. What we call it at that point, I don't know yet, but it depends on also what comes out of this general plan. Typically, our community groups are called steering committees when they're developing a plan. So it might be called a steering committee or a blue ribbon committee or other things like that. They sort of serve the same purpose. So I would expect something similar for Hilo.
Thank you, Councilmember Kagiwara. Thank you, April, and the panel. So I think this could be a good moment. We are still in the space until 4 o'clock, but we could maybe transition to more one-on-one dialogue. Want to give actually an appreciation to the whole staff team that worked very hard to organize this event tonight. If you give them a round of applause. And also to our panelists who've been leading this effort for several years now and really took time to lead us and to get us to this process today. So thank you everyone for coming out, and folks will be around for one-on-one discussion. Much appreciated.